Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's lecture, Time and Eternity, was first presented by D.H.B. Falconer on the 22nd of July 1994. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
Section 1. The Concept of Immortality. Foremost among the precepts of Freemasonry are a belief in God and in the immortality of the soul. God is recognized as the divine creator of the universe, and the soul is that element of the divine spirit that resides in every person and distinguishes it from all other living things. The philosophical and theological aspects of these precepts are of special interest. The world's most widespread and enduring religions, from ancient times to the present, have important elements in common, of which a belief in a supreme being is preeminent. The supreme being is assigned a wide range of attributes and is known by many titles, commonly referred to under the name of God. A closely allied belief is that God has endowed every person with an inner life spirit or immortal soul. Within each of these beliefs, there is a wide range of philosophies and a broad spectrum of interpretive detail. For example, the soul, generally, is believed either to be part of God's spirit, or, at the very least, to be at one with God's spirit. In Hinduism, dating back more than 5,000 years, it is believed that the soul is immortal and coeval with God's spirit, having neither beginning nor ending, and consequently eternal. By contrast, Christian theology generally considers each human birth as a new creation that is immortal and consequently everlasting. Between these extremes, there are many nuances of interpretation. The most familiar statement that reflects this spectrum of belief probably is that of the preacher in Ecclesiastes who said, "Then the dust shall return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it." The word immortality came through Middle English and Old French from the Latin mortalitas, signifying that which cannot or will never die. Immortal is usually used to describe that attribute of the deity or of the soul which, in relation to inanimate things, would be said to be deathless or undying. Imperishable is sometimes used in the more poetic passages to convey perhaps more vividly that something is not subject to death, decay, or change. This introduces the concept of eternity and eternal life. Eternity also came through Middle English and Old French from the Latin aeternatus, and in the strictest sense signifies something that has always existed in the past and will exist forever in the future, thus having neither beginning nor ending. In contrast, everlasting signifies something that will endure through time, never ceasing to exist once it has been created. Thus, there is a subtle difference between life eternal and everlasting life. The former has neither beginning nor ending, whereas the latter allows for creation by birth, followed by never-ending life. Infinity also is a closely related concept. This word is derived through Middle English and Old French from the Latin infinitas, signifying a state that is beyond measure, extending without end in space, time, or number. In the theological sense, infinite connotes something that is absolute or perfect, such as God's infinite wisdom, power, and mercy. These concepts are directly related to elements of the creation. Section 2. Elements of the creation. It cannot be a coincidence that two fundamental elements required in the creation process, space and time, are intangibles. We cannot touch space. Our comprehension of space depends entirely upon our ability to visualize that space exists between those objects we can see that are located in space. Nor can time be touched. Its very existence seems even less substantive than space, as our conception of time is necessarily based upon the observation of transient events, not tangible objects. When developing his theory of relativity, Albert Einstein visualized the universe as a curved, elastic space-time continuum. A consideration of space-time in the creation shows that space and time cannot be regarded as independent entities, because time expands and contracts as intergalactic space expands and contracts under the influence of gravitational forces. Space and time are conjoined by a third essential element of the creation process, which is light. Although light also is intangible, insofar as it cannot be touched, nevertheless it is visible and seems all-pervasive, so its substance is more readily perceptible than that of other intangibles. It is common knowledge that light behaves in a wave-like manner, even though it is transmitted as photons, which are discrete particles of energy. Because, to the naked eye, light appears to be initiated or extinguished instantaneously, it seems natural and is readily acceptable that nothing can travel faster than light. By extension, it is not difficult to accept that all other electromagnetic waves, such as radio, travel through space at the velocity of light. Light is fundamental energy, equatable with matter and subject to the same laws of conservation of energy. Light defines a finite boundary for velocity, thus also defining the boundaries of space in the finite expanding space-time continuum that comprises our universe. Therefore, light provides a direct and positive link from the primeval explosion of the creation through the present and on into an endless future. Thus, light is the fundamental element connecting time with eternity. When the Scottish physicist and astronomer James Maxwell investigated the propagation of light, he developed equations that describe how light and all other radiations are propagated through space in the form of electromagnetic variations, having a minuscule wavelength around 0.003 of a centimetre and travelling at the velocity of light, which is some 300,000 kilometres per second. Maxwell's equations make no allowance for light to be slowed down by the force of gravity as it leaves a star, whereas the established laws of motion derived by Sir Isaac Newton takes the forces of gravity into account. To reconcile this apparent incompatibility, Einstein developed his special theory of relativity for bodies travelling at constant velocities. His famous equation interrelates the velocity of light with energy and mass, demonstrating the interchangeability of energy and mass and proving that nothing can exceed the velocity of light. It also shows that time on a moving object slows down as its velocity increases, ultimately ceasing at the velocity of light. Einstein realized that this special theory of relativity did not give a complete explanation of the universe, as Newton had when he published his Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica in 1687, generally referred to as Newton's Principia. To overcome this deficiency, Einstein spent another 10 years developing the general theory of relativity published in 1916. The general theory takes acceleration and the forces of gravity into account. It explains how space-time is warped by the gravitational influences of bodies in space, so that it acts like a lens and deflects beams of light. It also explains how a dark body is formed because its volume-mass relationship produces a gravitational force that requires an escape velocity greater than the velocity of light, thus precluding the escape of light. Anyone located on a dark body or within a black hole region, such as that at the center of our Milky Way, would be unaware of their peculiar situation. As the observed rate of expansion of the universe is increasing by about 32 kilometers per second per million light years, which is small in comparison with the velocity of light, many millions of years are likely to elapse before complete darkness prevails over the universe. Section 3. The Arrow of Time. The German surgeon and physicist Hermann von Helmholtz was a leader in the study of cause and effect and the relationship between heat and motion, coining the expression conservation of energy. In 1847, he proclaimed the law of conservation of energy to be universal, applying to all things both living and inanimate. Then, in 1854, when further considering the implications of the then evolving science of thermodynamics, Helmholtz put forward the concept that the universe is dying progressively and that ultimately it will reach a state of thermodynamic equilibrium, exhausted of all useful energy. Progressive deterioration from order to disorder, or chaos, was first investigated systematically in the 1880s by the Austrian physicist Ludwig Boltzmann, who studied the statistical behavior of molecules of gas based on Newton's laws of motion. Boltzmann derived the theorem of equipartation of energy, called the Maxwell-Boltzmann law, relating the distribution of energy among the various parts of a system at specific temperature. He also established the Boltzmann constant of physics, K, which occurs in nearly every statistical formulation in both classical and quantum physics. The relationship between space, time, light, and energy is vital in the relationship between time and matter, which the British astronomer Sir Arthur Eddington described so aptly as the arrow of time. The arrow of time is the signpost called entropy, pointing irrevocably from order to disorder. Entropy is the measure of disorder in any system that occurs when any change takes place. The fundamental laws of thermodynamics affirm that energy can be changed from one state to another, but cannot be created or destroyed, so that the total of what came into existence at the creation of the universe is all that can and will continue to exist in whatever form. They also confirm that natural events move towards a state of balance or equilibrium. Only a perfect crystalline solid at absolute zero temperature of minus 2,730 degrees Celsius can be devoid of entropy and thus in a state of perfect order. An implication of these laws is that time progresses in one direction only, towards the future, during which matter progressively decays as part of an irreversible process. Entropy continually and inexorably increasing with time until complete disorder prevails, as evidenced in nature. Section 4. Eternity. If the many and varied creation beliefs in the ancient religions are considered in respect of their essential elements, stripped of the mythical connotations used to convey their message to primitive minds, then they are not incompatible with modern scientific explanations of how the universe evolved. Modern cosmological concepts do not negate religious concepts, nor the precepts of Freemasonry. Nevertheless, there are many who use specific elements of cosmology or religion in an attempt to denigrate one with the other, instead of accepting each as an alternate strand leading to the same ultimate goal and seeking to develop complementary avenues of research. Over the centuries, repeated attempts have been made to disprove the existence of God, whether as creator of the universe or in any other capacity, but none has succeeded. When the Big Bang theory of creation was first advanced, even some eminent scientists hailed it as conclusive proof that creation could be initiated without an input from some external force or power. Ultimately, the proposition failed because the Big Bang depended upon the existence of an infinitely compressed nucleus from which matter could emanate, even if space-time was not a prerequisite. Theories for the evolution of life on Earth, without the assistance of some external influence, likewise have failed for want of a missing link. All attempts to generate life in the laboratory without some living catalyst have failed. The breath of life is as elusive as an infinitely compressed nucleus, which, even if found, would be uncontrollable by present human resources, being the equivalent of the total nuclear resources of our universe. Basically, the input of a divine force provides the simplest solution for the initiation of creation and evolution, which is always nature's way. Light is a vital component of the universe. Without light, life as we know it could not exist. Light probably is the most comprehensible of the intangible natural elements and is a perfect symbol of God. The law of conservation of energy allows for change, but neither gain nor loss of energy in a closed system, therefore not precluding some form of life, even if unknown to us, continuing in eternity. The arrow of time points irrevocably towards the ultimate decay of the universe as we know it, as foretold in the scriptures of all major religions. Will the ultimate degradation of our present universe coincide with the time when its ever-dispersing physical components achieve the velocity of light? When time comes to rest and intergalactic darkness prevails? Would this event merely be another milestone in eternity, beginning another cycle of regeneration? These things we do not yet know. Speculative Freemasonry developed from operative Freemasonry as a philosophical society. It urgently needs to be regenerated to fulfill its original and primary role, to enable it to take a prominent lead in seeking answers to questions such as these. Freemasons ought also to take a positive lead in achieving a reconciliation between science and universal religion, for the betterment and advancement of mankind. All petty differences must be put aside to achieve this end.
For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music, texts, and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries.
Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's presentation is a philosophical reflection called Truth. The copy I have is anonymous, but from looking online it appears that it was published in the Short Talk Bulletin of August 1932. I hope that you enjoy it.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
It is an odd fact that Freemasonry's direct teaching in regard to truth is less important than her indirect teaching. In the Entered Apprentices lecture, we learn of truth as the foundation of every virtue. To be a good man and true is the first lesson, etc. But these teachings regarding the third principal tenet are of truth in its narrower and more restricted sense. That use of the word as a synonym for sincerity, right dealing, absence of deceit, straightforwardness. Philosophers distinguish several verities of truth: logical truth, the conformity of reasoning to premises; ontological, metaphysical or transcendental truth, the doctrine that the existence of deity is proved by the very idea of his existence; and absolute truth, the reality behind the appearance or idea. These conceptions of truth have led to the more common use of the word as that which is believed to be so, as distinct from that which is believed to be the opposite of the fact. The witness who swears to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, indicates no more than his intention to state that which is known to him, believed by him, and that he will not intentionally deceive. A witness may testify to something which is not a fact and be unperjured, provided it is a fact to him. A man ignorant of astronomy may truthfully testify that the sun moves from east to west between the morning and night. His testimony is the truth as he knows it. That actually the earth moves beneath the sun while the sun stands still does not make him untruthful. The truth is not always easy to define. Some questions have several answers, all correct. Other questions cannot be answered as asked correctly. For instance, how many feet in a mile has only one true answer, 5,280. But what two whole numbers added together make 5,280 has 2,640 answers, all correct. What are the only two numbers added together that result in 5,280 cannot be answered correctly in the terms in which it is asked, because there are not only two numbers, the addition of which so result. In mathematics, there are many conceptions which have no actual truth behind them. By the very laws of mathematics, we cannot imagine a square root of -1. A root multiplied by itself must give it the number of which it is a root. No number, plus or minus, multiplied by itself produces a minus quantity. Yet this very conception of the square root of -1 is constantly used in mathematics, though it has no objective existence and no mathematical answer. The Entered Apprentice lecture teaches of truth as opposed to deceit, truth as a foundation of character, truth in the moral sense. In this sense, truth really is the foundation of every virtue. There is no justice without truth. There is no philanthropy without truth. There can be no self-sacrifice, no bravery, no rectitude, no virtue of any kind without a foundation in that which is sincere and honest, as opposed to that which is lying and deceitful. This aspect of truth is only part of the third principal tenet. It is vitally important. It must be learned, pondered, and observed, but it compares with the absolute Masonic truth as compares the moon to the sun. To grasp the idea of absolute truth is not given to many. All abstract ideas require real mental labor to formulate. The thought of fundamental, unchangeable, inescapable verities behind the form, substance, and phenomena of life is not easy. Yet difficulty but makes the idea the more precious when it does become part of a Freemason's mental concepts. A manufacturer is to make a table. Before he puts pencil to paper, he forms an idea of what a table looks like. He reduces this idea to a drawing and specification. It then becomes an idea made manifest so that others can understand it. But it is not yet a table. When the woodworker constructs the table from materials, cutting and fitting them from the plans, the idea becomes embodied. The table is now all three: idea, idea manifest, and idea embodied. To the observer, it is possessed of form and substance, is hard, varnished, throws a shadow, and can support other objects. In fact, a table. The absolute truth of the table is probably quite different. For all its seeming solidity and weight, we know that it is far more space than matter. We know that its atoms are composed of electrons whirling at inconceivable speeds about a central proton, and that if we could see it as it really is, not as it appears to the human senses, it would be a collection of bounding, moving, swinging, revolving particles of electricity, the force of which, if all were suddenly let loose, would be sufficient to wreck a city. But not a single scientist can yet even imagine what an electron really is. The absolute truth of it escapes the laboratory. Freemasonry is not all concerned with proving the verity of deity. She accepts a great architect as truth. But, as we have seen, truth has more than one classification. The absolute truth of deity can no more be known to man on earth than the absolute reality of the table can be realized by those who use it. Our perception of the world and of life is sense-bound. From seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, we reason, think, and believe. Many aspects of physical things do not touch our five senses. For instance, the speed of the electron, the size of the atom. And unimaginable aspects of deity cannot enter our minds because a finite mind can never comprehend that which is infinite. The great Freemason, Lessing, said, "Pure truth is for God alone," phrasing in 6 words both the impossibility of mortals ever finding it and the reason we should seek it. Cicero, too, knew why we must seek when he said, "Our minds possess by nature an insatiable desire to know the truth." He uttered a truism, no matter what aspect of truth is considered. Chesterfield capped them both with his famous, "Every man seeks the truth, God only knows who finds it." Our ancient friend and brother, the great Pythagoras, was a poet, philosopher, and scientist when he stated, "Truth is so great a perfection that if God would render himself visible to man, he would choose light for him body and truth for his soul." Few men are able to tell others of the eternal verities, even if, at long last, they win them. To tell the truth, meaning to state the fact or belief as known, is easy. But to tell the truth unto men is like singing music to the tone-deaf, teaching differential calculus to a 6-year-old child, speaking in a language the hearer does not understand. He who even thinks he knows the lost word may never tell it. No syllables formed by mortal tongue may speak it. Listen to John Ruskin, sage of sages. Childhood often holds a truth with its feeble fingers which the grasp of manhood cannot retain, which it is the pride of utmost age to recover. The very young and the very old know that which they cannot tell to us of the middle years. As Freemasons, we know a truth we cannot tell even to the initiate, who must find it for himself in the midst of our symbols and of our teachings. The great light holds 1,000 truths and one great truth. Alas, that some are so blinded to the latter that, finding an apparent failure of conformity between page and page, they see not the truth behind. Such men cannot see the water for the waves, or find the forest because there are too many trees. a collection of books, the Bible, has been translated and retranslated. Our Bible has come down to us through the hands of thousands of willing, devout workers, each with the faults and frailties of mankind. Some copied well, some copied ill. Some historians were accurate, others allowed play to their imaginations. Of course, in this mighty literature are self-contradictions. Of course, different prophets, historians, singers, and inspired leaders saw different aspects of the truths they taught, and so taught differently. Recall the story of the two knights of old who fought to exhaustion over the colour of a shield, one saying it was black, the other white. When the contest was over, they examined the shield together and found one side white and the other black. So with these different manners of teaching in the great light. Each teaches the truth as its writer saw it. The real truth, the whole truth, the absolute truth is to be found in no verse, chapter or book, but in the book of books as a whole. From the beginning of time, man has attempted to visualize that which he cannot imagine. He would put into words, write upon paper, limn on canvas, shout to the housetops that which he cannot conceive. What is the conventional idea of heaven? Place of golden streets flowing with milk and honey? Why? Because gold is precious and beautiful, milk and honey good, and hard for the lowly and poor to get. Injustice oppressed man for centuries. Justice became a hope. A just judge, no matter how severe, was far better than an unjust judge. Hence, we have an early conception of God as a strict, stern, implacable judge. Later on, much later, came the idea of a merciful judge, a loving, kindly, compassionate father. As man has grown and learned, so has his conception of the truth of the great architect of the universe grown more beautiful. Will any contend that man is perfect? Nay, man humble or exalted, man learned or ignorant, man wise or foolish, cannot conceive the unthinkable majesty and beauty, the stupendous power and glory, the unfazable marvel, which must be the absolute truth of the great architect. The dearest hope of all mankind, since the first man cried the birth cry, was agonized down the centuries by Job. If a man die, shall he live again? And the centuries have given 100 answers. Immortality in men's minds is as different as the men. To some it is rest, to others opportunity to do all that life denied them. To some it is pleasure, to others it is knowledge, to yet others it is a formless, ageless, boundless contemplation, the nirvana of the Buddhist. But no thinking man believes that his most glorious conception of immortality can compare to whatever may be the absolute truth of that magnificent belief. Concrete truths are all relative. Absolute truth is unchanging. We think of men as good or bad, moral or unethical, wise or ignorant, only as compared to others. Absolute goodness, morality, and wisdom we cannot know here. We cannot know the absolute truth of anything, but we may search for it. We may so order our lives, so read the great light, so follow the teachings of the ancient craft, that our quest brings us one step closer to the barrier which forever separates mortal eyes from immortal truth. That he who quests earnestly and seeks sincerely will, at long last, pass that barrier and with his own eyes see that the Absolute is the magnificent truth of Freemasonry. So mote it be.
For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music, texts and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries.
Freemasonry's presence, however passive, lies behind almost all of the esoteric orders of the last 2 centuries. Orders whose creators believed in Freemasonry as the supreme vehicle for the transmission of a superior traditional wisdom. Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's video, Freemasonry and the Hermetic Tradition, was written by R.A. Gilbert and was first published in the Gnosis magazine number 6 during the 1980s. In it, he argues against any possibility that Freemasonry could have been influenced by Hermetic traditions, arguing to the contrary that Freemasonry was itself an influence on the creation of Hermetic traditions. Personally, I find the first part of his argument a little bit unconvincing and really just as shrill and unsubstantiated as the Hermetic traditions he is attacking. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, because I think it's well and truly worthy of discussion. In any case, it's an interesting paper and I hope you enjoy it.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
If, as is stated categorically by the United Grand Lodge of England, Freemasonry is not a secret society and is not a religion or substitute for religion, then what is it? And why should students of the occult be concerned with the history, symbolism, and rituals of this peculiar system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, which is defined officially as one of the world's oldest secular fraternal societies, a society of men concerned with spiritual values. Its members are taught its precepts by a series of ritual dramas which follow ancient forms and use stonemasons' customs and tools as allegorical guides. The essential qualification for admission and continuing membership is a belief in a supreme being. Membership is open to men of any race or religion who can fulfill this essential qualification and are of good repute. Perhaps the occultist who sees in Freemasonry the survival of ancient pagan mystery religions sees something that, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder, for what he sees is clearly invisible both to the governing body of the craft and to the bulk of its members. Freemasonry does have a traditional history around which its rituals are constructed that places its origin at the time of the building of King Solomon's temple. But in the material world, we can trace its history from 1717 AD, when the first Grand Lodge in the world, the Grand Lodge of England, was founded at London. From that time on, Freemasonry has expanded, undergoing many vicissitudes along the way: schisms, reconciliations, quarrels over jurisdiction, and quarrels over essential beliefs. Until today, it is firmly established in most countries of the world, the exceptions being countries of the communist bloc and those countries that suffer under Islamic fundamentalism. Regular Freemasonry, which among other things demands from its members a belief in God, forbids the discussion of religion and politics in its lodges, and forbids also the admission of women to membership, is strongest in the English-speaking world, and it is a curious paradox that England, where the craft is most conservative, should have produced not only the foremost Masonic historians, but also the most adventurous and most widely read speculative interpreters of Masonic symbolism and philosophy. These latter have been invariably influenced by the Masonic traditions of continental Europe, where higher degrees and exotic rites have proliferated since the middle of the 18th century. At this point, it would be well to advise that all higher or additional degrees and grades are later inventions than the 3 craft degrees of Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, and Master Mason, including the Supreme Order of the Holy Royal Arch, declared in 1813 by the United Grand Lodge of England to be the only degrees of pure ancient Masonry. And further, that the governing bodies of the higher degrees have no control whatsoever over the craft degrees. The complex phenomenon of European Freemasonry was significantly different from its counterpart in 18th century England. The essential Masonic tenets of tolerance and benevolence were overlain from an early date with layers of metaphysical speculation, while the simple craft rituals were extended into elaborate ceremonies for a multiplicity of degrees, grades, and orders, all of which involved extravagant traditional histories and hierarchical ruling bodies that became increasingly divorced from reality. To some extent, such rites represented a way of escape from the political oppression of illiberal regimes and the spiritual suppression of the Roman Catholic Church, which had been implacably hostile to Freemasonry from the beginning. But they inevitably drifted away from pure ancient Masonry to become either politicized or steered into overtly esoteric channels. Given their nature, it is scarcely surprising that it has been from these esoteric rites within and around Masonry, the Ellis Koans, the Strict Observants, the Illuminati, Cagliostro's Egyptian Masonry, and the 1001 self-styled Templar orders and chivalric degrees, rather than from craft Masonry that occultists and esoterically inclined Freemasons alike have drawn and continue to draw, their inspiration for orders of their own and their plethora of false notions about the craft and its origins. It is unfortunate that there can be no authoritative, official refutation of these false notions, but there can be no definitive pronouncement about the origins of Freemasonry for the simple reason that there is no certainty as to what those origins are. It is undeniable that Masonic ritual, in its essentials, is based upon the presumed customs and the working tools of medieval stonemasons. But there is little or no evidence to support the popular theory of a regular progression from operative Masonry to the speculative craft via a hypothetical transitional period during the 17th century, in which non-working members were gradually accepted into Masonic lodges until they constituted a majority. A more probable theory of origin, but still it must be stressed only a theory, is that which suggests that Freemasonry arose during the 17th century from the efforts of a group of enthusiasts who sought to establish tolerance in religion and the general improvement of society in an era in which intolerance prevailed. They protected themselves by adopting the myth of the building of King Solomon's Temple as an allegory of their aims, and by utilizing the wholly appropriate structure of extant building guilds. An eminently sensible theory, but for the occultists, wholly inadequate. There must be, for their purposes, both a strictly esoteric content in Masonry and an ultimately Gnostic source. Tolerance is too prosaic, and the medieval building guilds were unsatisfactory by virtue of their uncomfortably orthodox profession of Christian faith. Either the Knights Templar or the Rosicrucians, or both, offer a more satisfying explanation of the emergence of Freemasonry in its speculative form. That there is no shred of historical evidence linking the Templars with Masonry, nor any certainty that the Rosicrucians as an organized body ever existed, does not matter, since, for occultists and for esoteric Freemasons, Freemasonry exists primarily to perpetuate the teachings of the ancient mystery schools, and there is thus necessarily a definite, if hidden, connection between Freemasonry and its supposed forerunners. To the conclusive demonstration of such links, Masonic writers of esoteric inclination have devoted their literary careers, only to have their work rejected as unsound by more prosaic Masonic scholars. Esoteric Masons, however, have been, and still are, mightily impressed by the apparent scholarship of authors such as the Reverend F. de P. Castells, who considered that he had proved beyond doubt the link with the Rosicrucians, and maintained that Freemasonry originated with certain Hebrew mystics associated with the Temple of Jerusalem, and that they are represented by Kabbalists of historic times. Castells wrote during the 1920s and 30s, and although he was far from being the first Masonic historian on whom occultists had drawn, he was among the most impressive, for he united his historical studies with a critical analysis of Masonic rituals and their symbolism. And it is Masonic symbolism that has always proved more irresistible to the occultists even than Masonic history. The rituals of the craft degrees represent the progress of the apprentice towards the mastery of the craft, illustrated by the building of the temple, and accompanied by the inculcation of moral precepts, culminating in the symbolic reenactment of the death of the architect Hiram Abiff, who preferred to die rather than betray the secrets of his order. In the first degree, the three great lights, the volume of the sacred law, the square and compasses, and the three lesser lights, the sun, the moon, and the master of the lodge of Masonry, are explained to the candidate in symbolic form, while in each of the 3 degrees the appropriate working tools are similarly explained: the gavel, plumb rule, level, etc. There is also an elaborate emblematic diagram or tracing board for each degree, the symbolism of which, variously architectural, biblical, and numerical, is explained in detail. While such a wealth of symbolism has a very specific meaning within Freemasonry, its very richness has left it vulnerable to the most wild and extravagant interpretations on the part of occultists and of esoteric Masons who ought to know better. Nor is the unreason of such interpretations lessened by the invariable insistence of the interpreters on seeing the 3rd degree as a rite of death and resurrection, which it is not. It may suit the purposes of the occultist to see it in this light, but it is simply and solely a representation of the death of Hiram and his subsequent exhumation for decent reburial. Speculation on the meaning of Masonic symbols began in the 18th century, but serious attempts to relate those symbols to ancient resurrection myths and to the mainstream of the Western Hermetic tradition did not begin until the occult revival of the late 19th century. At the same time, amateur historians of occultism began to seek esoteric origins for Freemasonry itself. When these 2 paths of research merged, the results were curious indeed. H. P. Blavatsky, who was effectively the principal architect of the occult revival, had little interest in Freemasonry, but she utilized and believed much of the information amassed by Kenneth Mackenzie in his Royal Masonic Cyclopedia of 1877, and thus, through her own writing, acted as a channel for its dissemination throughout the theosophical world and far beyond the confines of Masonry itself. To what extent Mackenzie, who surprisingly did not accept that Freemasonry had its roots in Rosicrucianism, believed his own statements is unclear. But he and his colleagues, F. G. Irwin, John Yarker, Dr. Woodman et al., consciously attempted to emulate the 18th century proliferation of grandiose Masonic degrees and esoteric orders, with considerable success. For it was from this background of exotic rites that William Wynne Westcott gained the inspiration for his immortal brainchild, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That amazing creation, which came into being in 1888, owed its success in part to the increasing familiarity with Masonic symbolism via the works of Madame Blavatsky on the part of both male and female occultists. It is surprising enough that English Freemasons should have given rise, however indirectly, to an androgynous order, that it should have provided the administrative structure, the framework of its rituals, and no small part of its eclectic symbolism is even more surprising, given that the proportion of English Freemasons interested in and informed about occultism was and is minute. Of those Freemasons who were inclined towards occultism at the close of the last century, the majority were deeply involved in the Theosophical Society, or at least in the teachings it propagated. They absorbed from it the notion of the great antiquity of Eastern religions and the superiority of Eastern philosophy over Western thought. From their subsequent mental confusion arose most of the books that have propagated original and bizarre ideas about the history and meaning of Freemasonry. But however reliable their histories may be, and however unsound their conclusions, their influence among fellow occultists has been so widespread and so pervasive that the student of the Hermetic tradition and its history cannot ignore them if he wishes to separate fact from fantasy and to understand how the present syncretistic structure of occultism has come about. During his lifetime, the most influential of these alternative Masonic historians was John Yarker, whose monumental work on the Arcane Schools of 1909 is really a prehistory of Freemasonry, which he saw progressing from the Egyptian and Greek mysteries via Mithraism, Gnosticism, and alchemy, with a brief conclusion on its history in modern times. Yarker controlled or influenced numerous quasi-Masonic rites, and through these he effectively directed the thinking of many of his esoteric contemporaries, not least those who were members of the co-Masonic order, whose activities he supported while wisely refraining from joining. Universal Co-Freemasonry, which admits both men and women, was founded in France in 1893 and spread to England in 1902 by way of the Theosophical Society, collecting Annie Besant and her coterie en route. Once Mrs. Besant was established in 1907 as president of the Theosophical Society, her support, coupled with that of C.W. Leadbetter, led to a rapid expansion of co-Masonry among Theosophists, taking in even those who had previously been bitter opponents of Freemasonry. The order was, however, susceptible to the wider teachings of Theosophy, as Leadbetter made clear in his utterly uncritical Glimpses of Masonic History in 1926. With the advent of Dr. Annie Besant to the leadership of the order in the British Empire, the direct link between Masonry and the Great White Lodge which has ever stood behind it, though all unknown to the majority of the brethren, was once again reopened. Other occultists saw Freemasonry as deriving from sources not quite so far east. For Max Heindel, who was not a Freemason, it was rooted in hoary antiquity. Its very name was Egyptian. Freemason equals children of light. And the progress of mystic masonry would ultimately hasten the second advent of Christ. This was admittedly an extreme interpretation. Esoteric Masons were generally more cautious in their imaginings. Although Manly Palmer Hall could claim that Masonry came to Northern Africa and Asia Minor from the lost continent of Atlantis, not under its present name, but rather under the general designation of sun and fire worship. He further maintained that within the Freemasonic mysteries lie hidden the long-lost arcana sought by all people since the genesis of human reason. And while this is strictly a personal opinion, Hall's arguments are presented as authoritative, and the influence of his books, which have remained continuously in print, has been so widespread among American occultists over the last 60 years that those who read nothing else on Masonry have tended to treat his opinions as facts. In England, other speculative Masons have been equally influential. J.S.M. Ward saw Masonic symbolism in the initiation rites of virtually every human culture, past and present, and Freemasonry was, for him, the survivor of the ancient mysteries. Nay, we may go further and call it the guardian of the mysteries. Ward's symbolist approach to Masonic history ought to have appealed to occultists, but they are often unaware of him, for his work has been confined almost exclusively to Masonic circles, unlike that of Dr. Westcott, for whom the reverse was true. As befitted the supreme magus, or head, of the Masonic Rosicrucian Society, Westcott believed firmly in the development of Freemasonry out of Rosicrucianism, and he argued forcefully that Masonic ritual was deeply tinged with Kabbalistic ideas. And yet, for all the flaws in his scholarship, Westcott appreciated the value of historical research, and he thus rejected as unfounded the claims of Yarker, Ward, and others for a descent of Freemasonry from Mithraism or from the Essenes. But while Westcott's purely occult works have remained popular, his Masonic writings are virtually unknown, and in attempting to bring Freemasonry to the notice of the occult world, he was less successful than his younger and more mystical contemporaries, W. L. Wilmshurst and A. E. Waite, both of whom wrote for a wider audience than a purely Masonic one. They represented their respective visions of Freemasonry as part only of a more comprehensive and continuing spiritual tradition. And, more importantly, the works of both men are still available, reaching and influencing an infinitely greater number of readers than either the works of Westcott or those of their little-known critics who wrote to protest against their errors of fact. Waite, especially, was prone to treating historical data in a very cavalier manner. And this is the paradox of the Hermetic misunderstanding of Freemasonry. The ideas of its motley crew of apologists are propagated in books that survive when the lives of their authors and their opponents are long forgotten. For there is a common thread that binds them all together. Credulous oddities, such as Heindel and Ledbetter, earnest if unsound scholars like Ward and Westcott, and such luminous mystics as Wilmshurst and Waite, all shared a passionate conviction that Freemasonry holds a key, indeed the key, which will unlock the ancient mysteries, the secret tradition, or whatever one chooses to call that subtle alternative to mundane history and orthodox thought. In the last analysis, that is what matters. It is of little consequence whether or not Freemasonry is descended from the mystery religions of antiquity. The important thing is that influential figures in the recent history of the Hermetic tradition believed that it did, and this belief coloured their perception of Hermeticism as a whole, and determined the manner in which they gave those perceptions practical expression. Without an appreciation of their idea of Freemasonry, however distorted and inaccurate it may have been, we cannot fully understand their role in the development of the Hermetic tradition of the modern era. Nor is this all. We must also be aware of the true nature of Freemasonry itself, of its relationship with esoteric systems of thought during the period of its creation, and of the more esoteric theories of its origin. It may be that none of these theories is correct, that the occultists were right after all in assuming a vast antiquity for the craft. But even if it proves to have been nothing more than a curious social club, its presence, however passive, lay behind almost all of the esoteric orders of the last 2 centuries. Orders whose creators believed in Freemasonry as the supreme vehicle for the transmission of a superior traditional wisdom. Unless we acknowledge the influence of the idea of Freemasonry and attempt to understand its nature, both as it is and as it was believed to be, our understanding of Hermeticism will be impoverished. We shall be, like the candidate for Masonic initiation, in a state of darkness. A vast institution which includes upwards of 10,000 lodges in all parts of the world and considerably over 1 million members, which, in the mere matter of paid-up capital, must be enormously rich and of almost incalculable resources in the collective wealth of the brothers. Where is the limit of its possibilities? Each of these lodges is a storehouse of extraordinary symbols which cannot be generally interpreted. What do they mean? Every one of these million initiates is bound by solemn vows to an inviolable secrecy. What do such pledges conceal? Is it some colossal conspiracy which has been elaborating for centuries and possibly is now ripe for universal revolution? Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's presentation, The Secret of Freemasonry, was written by Arthur Edward Waite, one of the great figures of late Victorian esotericism. Arthur Edward Waite, who lived from 1857 to 1942, was an American-born British poet and scholarly mystic who wrote extensively on occult and esoteric matters, and was the co-creator of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck. As his biographer R.A. Gilbert described him, Waite's name has survived because he was the first to attempt a systematic study of the history of Western occultism, viewed as a spiritual tradition rather than as aspects of proto-science or as the pathology of religion. Waite joined the Outer Order of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in January 1891 after being introduced by E. W. Berridge. In 1893 he withdrew from the Golden Dawn, and in 1896 he rejoined the Outer Order of the Golden Dawn. In 1899 he entered the Second Order of the Golden Dawn. He became a Freemason in 1901 and entered the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia in 1902. Tonight's presentation, The Secret of Freemasonry, is taken from his 1893 book, Azoth, or the Star in the East, and despite its subject matter, was written a full 8 years before Waite joined the craft. I hope you enjoy it.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
Thomas de Quincey, the immortal consumer of a daily dose of 60,000 drops of laudanum, was a man of many words, and of these some were sufficiently bitter and satirical. Writing on the subject of secret societies, he once said that Freemasonry was the great imposture of the modern world, even as the Eleusinian mysteries was the great fraud of antiquity. It must be admitted that in the course of its existence, the Masonic Brotherhood has numbered in its ranks some exceedingly strange personalities. The transcendental trickeries of Casanova, Saint-Germain, and Cagliostro must rank among the most entertaining scandals of history. But the rogueries which are grafted for a time upon great institutions are not to be identified with essential elements which go down into the heart of institutions, and a part of their bone and flesh. It would be preposterous to suppose that a passing shaft of De Quincey has clung like a stigma to Masonry in the popular mind, but it is certain that those persons of average intelligence and education who are not attracted by its mystery are still frequently repelled by the conceptions it presents to them. A vast institution, which includes upwards of 10,000 lodges in all parts of the world, and considerably over 1 million members, which, in the mere matter of paid-up capital, must be enormously rich, and of almost incalculable resources in the collective wealth of the brothers, where is the limit of its possibilities? Each of these lodges is a storehouse of extraordinary symbols which cannot be generally interpreted. What do they mean? Every one of these million initiates is bound by solemn vows to an inviolable secrecy. What do such pledges conceal? Is it some colossal conspiracy which has been elaborating for centuries and possibly is now ripe for universal revolution? Alternately favoured and proscribed in most countries where it has openly and conspicuously flourished, long persecuted and still consistently denounced by the Church of Rome, accredited more or less definitely with most of the social cataclysms which have convulsed Europe, identified in methods and ends with the dark policies of plotting Illuminates and Carbonari. Though in England it may be a benefit society, abroad it is a political league, and where the surface is all mystery and secrecy, there must be some volcanic danger in the depths. So reasons the ignorant and nervous mind. There is a literature of the subject, which exhibits it in another light, but it is practically unknown to the vulgar, who, at most, are acquainted with the bogus revelations of Carlyle and a few kindred retailers of the secret out. There are just 3 elements in the mystery of Freemasonry which deserve to be briefly appraised. In the first place, the Brotherhood has existed for an indeterminate number of years, of which the first unit is occasionally denominated the Night of Time, and is unequipped with any adequate materials for its own history. Apart from the fabulous extravagances of romantic theorists, it has no notion of the date, place, or circumstances of its origin, and it is wholly improbable that the researchers of the most painstaking antiquaries would succeed in disentombing its past. This element of mystery may, therefore, be accepted as of an essential and unavoidable kind. Its natural consequence has been the gradual growth of a second species of mystery in the fables which have been devised by imaginative persons who have produced many marvellous histories designed for the enhancement of its dignity. Their name is Legion. A moderate computation at least would fix them as numerically equal to the Arabian Nights' entertainments. And their collection, would anyone undertake it, might be worthy of Scheherazade herself. It is all glamour and enchantment, and as each is exclusive of the other, they begin with Adam in paradise and end with the alchemist Ashmole. There is an enormous variety of legend and a very satisfactory chaos. But, as we have ceased to write folios on the Druids and on the origin of Stonehenge and Karnak, as the archaeology of today is content to confess itself ignorant about many matters which gave monuments of erudition to our ancestors, what is fabulous in the history of Masonry may also become a thing of the past. The adept may be content to be ignorant of what he cannot possibly know, so that this element in Masonic mystery is not of an essential kind. There is, finally, the secret of Masonry. There is that profound and abysmal mystery which the rope and plummet of the vulgar have never sounded, though it is more than broadly whispered that all initiates who have bottomed it have discovered themselves in vacuo bombinans, like the famous chimera of the schoolmen. In spite of Carlyle and Johnson, in spite of occasional revelations of expelled and seceded associates, the secret of Masonry would appear to still be undivulged. Now, in an association which has existed in the open light of history for at least 200 years, which, moreover, is credibly averred to be as ancient as old night, which numbers, we have seen, 10,000 lodges and 1 million members, and has occasionally initiated that sex which is the chartered libertine of the great world of gossip. In such an association, it is plain from the nature of humanity that there is no secret. Had there been such a treasure in such a storehouse of mystery, it would inevitably have been spoiled long ago, oaths and adjurations notwithstanding. As it is, the vacuous nature of the great arcanum of allegorical architecture is its permanent protection. Curiosity has attracted thousands to the ranks of the Brotherhood, and they have returned to inform us that there is no cause for mystery, that there is nothing to tell, and of course, they have never been believed. There was possibly a time in the past, between the epochs of Chaos and Solomon, between Solomon and Eleusis, or between Eleusis and the artist Elias, when Masonry may have had a secret. The doctrine of analogy, in other words, the principle that there is no smoke without fire, would lead us to conclude so much, but it has melted, like its early Grand Masters, into the infinite azure of the past. The prophet has, in fact, departed and has left nothing but his footprints to be cherished by his less favoured successors. The secret of Freemasonry is, therefore, a mystification rather than a mystery, but it is an inheritance from the past, and is not a conscious imposture. It has been hallowed by the curiosity of the centuries. It answers well as a modus operandi, and may therefore pass unchallenged in an age which has elaborated the gospel of utilitarian philosophy. The society, however, has an object, though its secrecy be its sole secret, and the universal diffusion of such a brotherhood is in itself a substantial indication that this object is Catholic or universal in character. The the dutiful children of the Latin Church are taught to believe that it is atheism in religion and anarchy in law. There are others who affirm that it is the transmutation of base metals into gold, and that it is only the wealth of the society which prevents this object being practically prosecuted by its members. Many erudite persons, on the other hand, are assured that the sole purpose of the entire order, whether it be here or at Pampellevuso, is to execute a tardy vengeance on Pope and King for the butchery of Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Templars. It is equally certain, in the opinion of yet another section, that the restoration of the Stuart dynasty is the sole end of the royal art. All of these theories have been proved times out of number to the satisfaction of those who hold them. Yet the world has been preserved from universal cataclysms. Few persons, as yet, manufacture gold. The dust of 5 centuries has collected above the ashes of the Templars, and the House of Hanover remains unmenaced by the mythic dynasty of Bavaria. The truth is that, as usual, popular opinion and romantic theory have mistaken the transitory purposes of individual Masons for the grand ends of the United Brotherhood. Some continental lodges have undoubtedly meddled with politics and hatched plots in the penetralia of their temples under the mask of the square and compass. The grand luminaries of the Reign of Terror were most, if not all of them, Masons, and the Grand Orient of France in the days of Maximilien Robespierre seethed in a sea of blood which was of a redder dye than her allegorical rose of morning. But this was an incidental aberration for a period of fever heat. So also, in the middle of the 18th century, that form of the Golden Passion, which was known to our ancestors under the name of the Philosopher's Stone, took possession of the strongholds of the fraternity, and Masonry, both in France and Germany, was practically divided between those who were in search of alchemical secrets and that extraordinary crowd of mystics who were followers of Weishaupt, Martinez Pasquales, and the more celebrated initiate Saint Martin. The true object of the Masonic fraternity differs from the aims which have been ascribed to it precisely in that way wherein a universal institution would be expected to differ from a fanatical craze. In its vulgar aspect, its purpose is benevolence and providence. In its esoteric significance, it is an attempt to achieve the moral regeneration of the human race by the construction of a pure, unsectarian system of simple morality to create the perfect man. It is therefore at one with the intention of evolution, and at the other with the end of mysticism. Whether it has consistently pursued this sublime end, whether, as a body, its members have conformed their daily lives to this ambition, is another question. It is sufficient for our purpose to indicate the true aim of the fraternity, which, even at a period of generous indifference like the present, has continued to be misjudged. For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons for Freemasons. Visit FromTheQuarries.com or YouTube at From the Quarries.